bombing the South carried no costs. And it's striking when you read the declassified, depending on papers, you're kind of like stolen archives. You get the real story, not what's declassified by the government. And therefore, they're almost ignored by scholarship and by the media, practically ignored. But they're very revealing. For example, one of the things they show is that the bombing of the North was planned in meticulous detail. They really thought about it, how far should we go. Take a look at the bombing of the South, it's not even mentioned. Just do whatever you feel like. So there's barely any mention of planning. You want to target villages with B-52 bombing, do it, and so forth. And the anti-war movement is responsible for this too, because they kept to the same framework overwhelmingly. And that's the picture that lasts in history. So look at history of the war, that's what it is. By the late 60s, things really had changed. And a lot of other things have changed too, because the anti-war movement just kind of integrated with a lot of other things that were going on. So you're barely beginning to get the beginnings of the feminist movement at that time. And the sources of it, I don't know what it's like here, but in the United States it was very striking to watch. Part of these sources of the women's movement were the sexism of the anti-war movement. Very striking. You can see it. Especially the draft resistors. I was working a lot with resistance. And the draft resistors were brave people. 17, 18-year-old kids who were facing real problem, not fun to spend years in jail, go to exile, never get back home. And they felt righteous, And part of the way you felt righteous was by oppressing young women, who then sort of supposed to serve you and admire you and so on. And the women, after a while, started to resent it because the general, typical anarchist sentiments of not being want to be kicked around were coming up. And that led to critique of the sexism of the young resistors, which for many of them was a real crisis. I know some who actually committed suicide because they couldn't deal with it. Here's this sense that we're doing something really courageous, but we're oppressors. How can we face that? And that was a good part of where the women's movement came from. The women's movement really didn't develop in a major force until the 70s, but it was part of the root. The environmental movement was barely beginning. The civil rights movement, which is an interesting story. As long as the civil rights movement was focused on, hideous sheriffs in Alabama, it was very popular in the North. But by the mid-'60s, it was shifting to the North. The last couple of years of we just had Martin Luther King Day, everybody celebrates Martin Luther King. What they celebrate is what he was doing in the South. By 1965, he was turning to organizing a poor people's movement. And that's all over the country. In fact, when he was assassinated, it was at a time when he was in the midst of beating the poor people's movement. Well, that's out of, kind of like going too far. So when you read about Martin Luther King, they say, well, the last couple of years of his life, he kind of lost direction. So it's okay to be self-righteous about Alabama sheriffs, but not to look at what's happening in your neighborhood. It's the same thing. That was the civil rights movement was beginning to turn into a general movement of the poor. It was very frightening to power systems, but it was going on, and a lot of organizing was going on. There was a lot of craziness. The youth culture was going on in its own way. Just revolt to music, style of dress, all kinds of things. But the general effect was extraordinary. It's lasting. The whole country just changed, became just more civilized. Like my own university, MIT, when around 1960, say, MIT was white males, well-dressed, ties and jackets, obedient, deferential, did your homework, and so on. If you walk around at MIT today, it looks like this. Half women, literally, half women, third minorities, casual dress, informal relationships, do serious work, or serious than before, but just totally different. And the same is true all over the country. So as far as, say, reaction goes, the educated elite sectors are far more rigid than they were, because they were frightened by all of this. The tremendous backlash against sort of neoliberalism comes from everything else, all part of the backlash. But among the population, it's just expanded all over. I did a talk in the Idaho-Washington border in a little town where all you see in the town is Christian evangelical posters and National Rifle Association and so on. 4,000 people show up from nowhere, just around there somewhere, and that happens all over. I mean, I spend maybe an hour a night. I spend a lot of time answering email, but probably an hour a night is just turning down invitations, which I really like to accept. And there are very few people, unfortunately, who are publicly available. It's not the kind of thing that privileged people do. We're all obviously very privileged, but they don't do it. So there are very few people who will do these things, and they're just overwhelming demand, and they get the same reaction. I mean, Arabs in.